Good evening, good evening, good evening. This is Tahis Love here. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Dunamis Sound Mind Services. Tonight, we want to talk about um, homelessness. November, as you very well may know, but you're going to know now, is Homelessness Awareness Month. That's right. November is National Homelessness Awareness Month. And so, in fact, today is Homelessness Awareness Day, National Homelessness Awareness Day. And in honor of National Homelessness Awareness Day and Month, we want to talk about uh, uh, homelessness awareness. Um, and so, what I'm attempting to do today is have a uh, live chat on YouTube about homelessness awareness. Okay. Now, as you mm, as you might see or have heard, there's a lot of people who are in danger of losing their current homes. Um, we have a lot of people that are in apartments, renting, but due to the pandemic, job loss, and different things stemming from the pandemic, many people are unable to pay their rent. They are grossly behind in their rent. And so they will have to move out of their homes, of their apartments. The only thing that's keeping a roof over their head for many people these days is the moratorium, at least here in New York. The moratorium is a law that prohibits landlords from evicting anyone at this time during the pandemic. Um, and so we have a lot of people who are, currently under uh, the pressure of having to move, um, possibly move into a shelter due to the fact that they don't have any income or they don't have enough income to pay their rent and secure their homes. And so I wanted to talk about homelessness today. It actually occurs more often than people want to think or know. And it's a growing issue and problem, and it's growing steadily worse, at least here in New York. Um, I suspect all over the entire country, the problem is growing. And so uh, I all of last week, well, not all of last week, from Wednesday to from last week Wednesday all the way till Sunday, I was volunteering at the homelessness awareness exhibit out at Astor Place. The exhibit was put together and sponsored by the Prescription Home NYC. Shout out to RX Home NYC. Um, that's a wonderful nonprofit um, homelessness advocacy organization, which has decided to bring attention to the homelessness problem here in New York City, particularly, in a different way. They've decided to build a whole exhibit where people could walk through. It's an interactive exhibit, and they had it up for several days last week. It's down right at this moment, um, but there is footage of it, and it was a really um, great eye opener for some. For others, like myself, it was a reminder of the issues and problems surrounding homelessness and shelter navigation, that it still exists and it's growing worse. And then for some, it was preparation, unfortunately. Um, where having gone through that exhibit and um, gaining that information, they now are um, better equipped, for lack of a better word. Um, and they now know what to expect with regards to um, looking for a next apartment after having gone through the shelter system here in New York. And so it's a topic that really needs to be discussed and shared. I know for me, I too was in the shelter. I experienced temporary homelessness with my five sons back in 2006. And going through that exhibit, it was bittersweet for me because um, it was it was bitter because it made me uh, remember, and it conjured up all of those memories that I experienced while at the shelter. Though my shelter stay was brief, I did meet many people who were at the shelter that I was at for many years. And, they just had very difficult times in their search for an apartment. There were people there that had an apartment and wound up back into the shelter. And so um, it was those were some of the bitter times um, in my life with my five children. But then also going through that exhibit, it gave me closure, and it was the sweet side about it was that I could look back and see how far I've come, and that the shelter uh, system and my stay there did help me, and it inspired me and impacted me in such a way that I do the things that I do now, working with uh, mental illness and um, mental health, also advocating. Um, and so, I really enjoyed um, volunteering and working there at the exhibit, walking through the exhibit with people and hearing their stories and their thoughts about homelessness. One of the things that I came away with is that for those that had not a clue how informed they were and how impacted they were just from walking through the exhibit. And so I was glad to be able to be their tour guide and share and listen. Um, and, I just felt that, a difference was made. And so that gave me closure, that gave me inspiration. And so I'm here before you today, just to talk about it. Now, what I'm attempting to do, and I hope that I'm able to do so. I'm attempting to have a chat discussion live. Um, I've been, working on my uh, Facebook and my YouTube channels, but I do most of my lives on Facebook, and then I'll go to my YouTube channel. And so my YouTube audience has been letting me know that they're not feeling as much love from me as my Facebook audience does. And so I wanted to change that. And so uh, I'm attempting to get that together right as I am speaking. I'm just looking for my next device so that I can read your comments and questions as I'm making this presentation. Okay, now, oh, I know where it is. Okay, so yeah, as I was preparing for and announcing to you all about tonight's chat discussion, I posted a question. Have any of you uh, personally experienced homelessness, or were you impacted directly by homelessness? Um, or do you know someone close to you that was? And so I want you to put that response in the chat as I uh, attempt to get to the chat live while I'm talking. Um, I have a few statistics here. Um, one statistic is that probably, if not you directly, someone that you know in your immediate circle has been impacted by homelessness. Studies show that um, in California houses um, most of our homeless population. Okay, California has the largest homeless population in the country. Okay, and the homeless population in California um, is the 40% of the country's homeless population lives in California. So out of all of the uh, people that are currently without homes in this country, 40% of them live in California. And that's as of 2019. Okay. Um, California has first got to the 40% mark back in 2016. Um, and it got to that mark, and it's still there. Okay. Studies show that it's probably going to uh, spike from there. But currently, uh, California has the largest homeless population in the country. Um, Now, I'm in New York, and New York has a pretty large homeless population, but it is not the largest. Um, Studies show that the the inner cities have more of a homeless population than the um, cities that are more suburban. Okay, and so reading that and finding out that stat, it made me wonder. Okay, well, when did we get to the point where there was homelessness? Homelessness had gotten uh, to be a national problem. When did we get to that point? And so, in my research, I found out that homelessness became a national problem back in the 1870s. 1870s. And the reason for homelessness uh, growing to national levels was because of soon after the Civil War, there was um, there was a large joblessness rate. It heavily increased, and so you had many people who had jobs uh, prior to the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, um, many of their job opportunities had vanished. You'll also recall that after the Civil War was the Emancipation Proclamation um, that was put in place, and so many uh, newly freed enslaved people were now, um, uh, you know, part of the mainstream population, and they too were displaced. Um, Once they were freed, they no longer had a place to live, and they were unemployed, freed, and so it was difficult for them to find a place to live. Um, and so it was, all of those people who were um, employed the whole um, by jobs that were um, generated from the slave trade um, and all of that. Because slavery had ended, those people were unemployed and had trouble finding new employment. So um, homelessness became a national um, issue, um, going all the way back to the 1870s. Okay. And it's been a national issue ever since. Um, it just would kind of level off, and as our country expanded, because back in the 1870s, we had states and everything, but most of our uh, United States at that point was on the East Coast. And so as our country expanded going westward towards California, um, then we had more land and space, and so people were able to develop proper housing um, and spread out. Okay, but um, since 1870, we had the homeless issue. Now, there were different periods in our history where uh, because of the rise in joblessness, um, homelessness also rose as well. And homelessness started out as an issue with men. Most of the unemployed men were the ones that were found themselves without homes, and so they these men that could not find jobs, um, and were out homes, they um, they had to find places to live. Now, there was a progression. Um, there were places, yeah, many of them lived on the street, um, in different encampments uh, in California. There was a street where they sent logs down the, they would push logs down this street so that it would, uh, go to the logging factory, the lumber factory, and the lumber would then get cut up and whatnot. But they would send these long logs down the street. They would push them, and they would roll or skid down the street, and they called this street Skid Row. Skid Row, and many uh, many men that uh, were looking for jobs at that lumber factory, or were looking for jobs, period. They found a home or an encampment there, um, along Skid Row. Hence, we have the saying today, that person looks like, or they're headed towards Skid Row. There was an actual place called Skid Row, where during the day they would send the lumber um, down that street, and in the evenings, after the factory closed for the day, it was a place where people would have, um, unemployed men particularly, would set up encampments along both sides of the street, and they lived there um, until they were able to find a job and secure housing. So Skid Row was a place where people knew that they can go if they didn't have a place to live. So you had places like Skid Row, where people set up encampments in various states and cities across the country. And so you went from particular streets where people set up encampments, and they called those streets and those encampments Skid Row, to uh, that progressed to what is called flop houses. People began to build houses, temporary housing along uh, these Skid Row streets, or near, or in certain areas where they would build these uh, houses. They were built simply for temporary housing so that you would have a roof over your head. And they were called flop houses. You would go there just to flop, go to sleep. That was it. And they were set up for people who were unemployed, particularly again men who were having trouble finding jobs. These were single men job in order to have a family. So these were single men, and they would houses just to sleep. They didn't even have a whole room. They had, a place, on the floor or what have you, where they simply went to sleep. Um, they could go somewhere and wash up and get ready to go continue on their job search. And so those were flop houses. And then from flop houses, you went on to, and flop houses were the first sort of temporary housing that was set up. Now, flop houses, they weren't pretty. They were simply a place where you can just lay your head, basically. Um, you either, you paid very little money because these were people who were unemployed for the most part. You paid very little money, or you might um, do a service or something like that, trade something, um, or you know, um, slept there for free, but you only slept there. You did not, you didn't really live there. Okay. So when you got up to go on about your day or something, someone else may come and flop there. So it's called a flop house. Okay, and then from there, we went on to um, um, SROs. SROs are single room occupancies. Um, uh, these developers, uh, home builders, they started building, they took the flop houses a step further and built single room occupancies. So the flop house now, instead of just um, having a wide open space where you had a spot on the floor, now you can go to an SRO where you it was like a hotel, except you had one room and you could stay there longer. Um, you paid some money. They were so you had to rent it, and you got enough money where you can rent a room, and it was just a single room. You slept there, you ate there, and it was designed for only one person. So it was a little room. You could leave your things there and everything, and you slept there. You could live there, but it was just one room. Okay, so those are SROs, single room occupancies. Okay, so and again, that was temporary housing, um, where at least you had a roof over your head and you could stay there and you know uh, bring some things there. Whereas the Skid Row, that wasn't a roof over your head at all. You were actually outside in some kind of encampment under some kind of somebody's tent or some kind of makeshift, you know, covering over you. Um, and then uh, it wasn't like it was still better than a flop house where it was a house, big room, and people just had a spot on the floor, where they put their pillow down or what have you, and they just slept. So single room occupancies were actual hotels, um, where you paid money and you could stay there. Um, uh, so it was, even though it was temporary housing, it was a little bit, it was more longer term than some of the other temporary housing that I had uh, mentioned before. And then you went from these single room occupancies to um, hotels, where uh, in the hotel you have maybe more than one room, or you have more accommodations in that one room. Um, and you could stay there, a couple of days, maybe a couple of months. Um, but a hotel, even today, is considered temporary housing. Um, but um, it's more long term and more secure, so to speak, than a flop house or even an SRO. But we do have um, SRO um, kind of housing even today. Um, they're the rooms is still one room, but it might be like a kitchenette where you have designated areas to do different things in that one room. Um, okay, so um, and then from the hotels where similar to what we have today, um, we now have shelters, um, where the inside of a shelter, those are buildings are designed. They have rooms or spaces where there's a bed, bathroom. You have family shelters. You have um, single adult shelters. You have shelters where uh, you can have children in the shelters, and then you have shelters where there are no children. Those are the adult shelters. And then you have domestic violence shelters as well. And in the domestic violence shelters, um, you might have there, there are domestic violence shelters that are designed to have families in there, usually a parent with children, and then are secured, so that um, one who um, commit so that people's or the family's offender or abuser um, cannot readily get to them. Okay, so that's the progression of shelters and temporary housing um, over over the history. And so some more stats. Well, now that I've gone over the history of where homelessness comes from and started, um, there were after in the late 1870s, after the Civil War, there were a lot of displaced former slaves looking for housing. These people did not have monies like that where they could purchase a home. they had to they had to have land. Um, they didn't even have land. Many of them, most of them, didn't have land, and so they wound up having to, um, work for um, different people where they earned a salary if they had a skill or something like that, and then they could purchase land or pay for some sort of housing for themselves and their families. And so and so because of that, um, the large homeless population stemming from the after the Emancipation Proclamation and stemming from the results of the Civil War, um, many of the southern states had instituted vagrancy laws. Vagrancy laws were laws that uh, required the arrest of someone that was unemployed and living on the street. And so many of these former enslaved people were literally arrested, taken to jail because they did not have a job and did not have secure housing. Um, and so it made those laws made homelessness criminal. Okay. The only thing that these people were guilty of was being unemployed, and it wasn't even their fault why they were unemployed. But that's where that started from. I found that interesting, that you would think it best to arrest someone and take them to jail, rather than provide a home for them. But that was the thinking back then. And sadly enough, when you think about it, that way of thinking still persists today. So, um, as you will see. So, again, I ask, were any of you, um, or anybody that you know, impacted by homelessness, and if so, in what way? Um, Homelessness is an experience that uh, really impacts your mental, your emotional, as well as physical. It's a real, all-consuming experience. And so, in the in situations where people, are seeking help, those entities, um, agencies that seek to try to help people who are experiencing homelessness, um, they have it has to be a you know uh, a lot of services have to be administered, to say the least. And so, homelessness, uh, the it's very expensive. It's very expensive, dealing with homelessness. In fact, um, in New York, the shelter system and you know um funding for shelters is $1 billion industry. Billion with a B as in baby. $1 billion industry. And the federal government spends uh, billions of dollars to fund the shelter system. And I'm talking about here in New York, but also across the country. Um, Billions of dollars are um, allotted to fund the shelter system when it would be readily cheaper to just provide um, housing, low income housing, or um, put entities in place that will uh, regulate the cost of housing so that everyone can afford to um, have a roof over their head, so to speak. Um, but when I found out how much money our the government spends on temporary housing shelters, um, along with the services. Well, the billions of dollars is just for the shelter, and you know, the services that um, are in the shelter system and that go along with the shelter system. Um, when I found out how much money they spend, I'm like, that's a lot of money. When you can, uh, think of different ways to spend that money, where people will have more secured housing, because the shelter system is designed not for you to live there forever. It's designed so that it's temporary housing. Um, you know, you're there so that you have housing long enough to you can secure your own housing, um, get a job, pay rent, things of that nature. And so, yeah, it's a lot of money. Now I am trying to get on to YouTube from here because I want to see if there are comments as I continue on going along. Okay, I'm going to see if I can. I was trying to get it up on my tablet and that wasn't, it's moving too slow and I don't understand what that's about. So I'm going to see if I can get it on my laptop here. Oh, see, that's why. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, get that back in order. Okay, so yeah, there we are. I think the top of my head is being cut off. Let me see if I can raise that back up again. There we are. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. We should to continue on. Um, I just want to make sure this stays. Okay. Um, oh, let's see what happened there. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so um I was talking about, spending billions of dollars to secure to fund temporary housing, and how um we should be able to use those same monies to um, create more secure housing for everyone. And that's what I was talking about the last we were here. And so I don't understand why I can't. Okay. So, yeah, be sure to put your questions, your comments in the chat. I am almost there where I can look at them and read them. Um, then, and so uh, now the the average stay when you go through the shelter system here in New York um, is 520 days. 520 days. That's well over a year, and it's that's a lot of time to spend in temporary housing, just to uh, be able to hopefully find your next apartment. Now, of those 520 days on average that you spend in shelter, uh, automatically, when you first get in shelter, the first 90 days, you're just sitting there. You're sitting there, you filled out a lot of paperwork, and it takes them 90 days to determine your eligibility for what kind of housing you are eligible for. So um, I found that to be, you know, I experienced that, and I found that to be, you know, uh, a waste of time. But it takes all of these social service agencies at least 90 days to simply determine what a person or family is eligible for with regards to finding housing. Many people, they they when they go to the shelter system, they don't only need housing, they need everything. They might need a job, they might need medical insurance, they may need um, food, clothing. It's a lot that comes along uh, with going to the shelter. Most people escape to the shelter. They, no one wakes up one day and says, "Oh, you know what? I think I'm going to be homeless today." No one does that. Everyone prefers to have a roof over their head. It's part of living, your basic rights. No one wants to be in a shelter, but many times people find themselves there because of extenuating circumstances. Um, and so, um, why do people, uh, go to shelters? Because it's a place to get help. And most people, when they lose their housing for whatever reason, they are in desperate need of help. Okay, okay. Now I have found you, I believe. on YouTube. Okay, I think. All right, all right. So now I'm going to just turn down the volume here so that you won't, um, so that I won't make noise. All right, so I can see whether or not you are um have any questions and things of that nature. That's great. Okay, so yeah. So there is a most people, like I said, they escape to the shelter. They don't just, make up their mind that they want to be there. So I just want to mute this sound. Yeah, sorry. Um, thought uh, let's see, I'll make that sound. This is true. Oh, there we are. Okay, so thanks so much. Yeah, so most people escape to the shelter, as I was saying, and look for they're looking for services, all kinds of services, because depending on the nature of what transpired that led them to um, run to the shelter in the first place. And so people go to the shelter for many, many different reasons. And But there are uh, some reasons that most people wind up in the shelter. Okay, I in the top four reasons that people wind up in the shelter are: number one, the first reason is um, loss of their dwelling. So that could mean that the landlord decided, you know what, I'm not renewing your lease, or uh, I have to raise the rent, and the person or family can no longer um, pay the rent at the new rent rate. So uh, loss of dwelling. Um, Another way you can lose your dwelling is a fire, or something happening to your building where it's no longer livable. So loss of dwelling, that's the first reason. That's the top reason that people wind up in shelters. Um, and then the second reason is loss of job, loss of income. If you lose your income, you can no longer pay your rent, um, and you know your landlord will evict you. So loss of job is the number two reason for uh, why people wind up in shelters. Uh, the number three reason is the number three reason is domestic violence. Domestic violence um, usually happens to um, families, and um, it could be the mother with children. It could be a parent. It could be family members that, because of the danger um, stemming from whatever the abuse that occurred in the home, um, domestic violence is the number three reason why people run to the shelter. Okay. In fact, loss of dwelling, loss of job, domestic violence makes up 14% of the 14% of the people who run to shelters. Um, okay, domestic violence, and they need immediate emergency uh, dwelling, shelter. Okay, and then the number four reason for um, why people go into the shelter is um, the is sickness or injury. Um, so because people get sick or um, injured um, all the time, you know, right after they get out of the hospital, um, they go back, try to go back home or what have you, because they haven't been home or no one's paying the rent or they're not able to pay the rent, but due to their illness or their injury, they lose their home, their apartment. So many times they come out of the hospital and go right into the shelter, um, which is very unfortunate. So the top four reasons why people wind up in the shelter is loss of uh, dwelling, fire, um, can't afford the rent, or the landlord will not renew the lease. Number two, loss of job or income. Um, Number three, domestic violence. And number four, sickness or injury. Okay, those are the four top reasons why people wind up in the homeless shelter. Um, and number five, the fifth reason, um, closely behind sickness and injury, is substance misuse. Okay. Um, Substance misuse, you know, especially if it's uh, debilitating in such a way that you cannot function well enough to have a job, keep a job, you know, meet your responsibilities, yes, it leads to homelessness. And so those are the top five, actually, um, reasons why people and how people wind up in the shelter system um, here in the United States. And so reading those statistics, I'll give you the actual numbers. Um, Substance misuse makes people who wind up in the shelter due to substance misuse make up 8%, 8% of the homeless population. Okay. People who are sick or injured that are in shelters, they make up 13% of the homeless population. Okay. Um, Domestic violence victims and families, survivors and families, make up 15% of the homeless population. That's in the shelters. And then uh, loss of job, they make up 25% of the homeless population. And Those who simply lost their dwelling make up 28 to 30% of the population. Okay. Um, and so that's how that falls out. There are many, many other reasons why people wind up in the shelter. I just was giving you the stats for the top five reasons. Okay, but there are other reasons, um, and some of the reasons overlap. Sometimes someone winds up in shelter with both a domestic violence issue and job loss, or um, um, loss of dwelling and um, injury. You know, so they overlap. It's it could be any number of reasons why people are in the shelter and find themselves in shelter. And now, as I stated earlier, one when the homelessness started out as an issue that impacted unemployed men back in the 1870s, um, all the way through to the um, the 1980s. Once we got to the 1980s, the people who were counted amongst uh, the homeless population expanded, and it was no longer uh, unemployed males. Um, it began to become families, whole families, women with children primarily, and from 1980 forward till now, um, women with children and families are they make up the largest population amongst those who are homeless. Okay. Now, how that happened, what progressed, what progression happened that led us to there. There's a whole lot of different reasons for that. Um, but mainly over the years, there were different um, events that caused homelessness to spike and wane. So, for example, you had in the 1930s, you had the Great Depression. A lot of people, particularly men, because back then the men were considered the income earners, the breadwinners, and so if they had a problem getting a job or keeping a job, then that affected the entire family. Women were home for the most part. And so in the 1930s, the Great Depression hit. That caused a lot of people to be without jobs, and that caused a spike in the number of people the number of men who were homeless, unemployed men. Then we went into the 1950s through the 70s, where there was a lot of, you know, uh, a lot of changes socially with the um, the civil rights laws and the impact on employment. Also, between the 1950s and the 1970s, there was the implementation of social services, um, so that uh, everyone would have basic needs met. So there was the implementation of social services, um, things like public housing, um, Medicaid, Medicare, um, um, and healthcare. Okay, so those things were implemented during between 1950 and 1970s, so that um, everyone would have an improved quality of life, and most people's basic needs were met, it was believed. Um, so that was an attempt uh, to remedy homelessness, but because there were new guidelines put in place, um, those the housing standards were changed. So many of the single room occupancies and um, many of the makeshift low income housing was done away with, um, to and replaced with standard, uh, more standard low income housing, affordable housing. Um, and so many people were displaced while that transition was happening. And so there was the increase of homelessness. Um, and then after 1950s through the 1970s, then we had beginning in the early 1980s, you had the AIDS epidemic. Oh, and let me back up a little bit. Between the 1950s and 1970s, uh, there was the creation and implementation of a uh, mass imprisonment, mass imprisonment, where a whole lot of men were incarcerated. They broke the law. Like I said, there were a lot of uh, new guidelines and laws put into place, restrictions put into place to foster a better quality of life for everyone. And a lot of Black and brown males were incarcerated, and the and they were incarcerated in, like in large numbers. And because of the massive incarcerations, um, that created um, that once you had gotten incarcerated, that pulled you out of the eligibility for public housing. And that caused generations of people to be locked out of um, eligibility for public housing. And that started happening between the 1950s and the 1970s uh, onward, which also led to a spike in homelessness. And then in the 1980s, you had the HIV/AIDS epidemic, which caused people to um, separate from their families, um, uh, be put in isolation. The LGBT community uh, needed a place to they needed a place where they could freely be themselves, um, and so um, they left, their homes, their families ostracized them, and so many of them were without homes uh, during that time. And then mid mid 80s, throughout the 90s, you had the drug epidemic with crack cocaine uh, and substances like that, where many people were just debilitated by substance misuse. And there was a steady spike in homelessness. And then, and then there was also, and then from the 1990s forward, there was the implementation of the rise in the cost of housing. So rentals, the cost of renting went up. The cost of um, purchasing a home went up. Um, and as it is going up steadily today. And so um, many people that had access to low income housing um, after the 1990s, once you got into the 1990s, low income housing was was not increasing, but decreasing, and the cost of just getting an apartment, work, even for those that were working and employed, became a real struggle, where the cost of renting an apartment was more than one third of your income. Now, um, you know, there is no restriction or boundary. Many people who are in apartments, they are living in apartments that the rent it takes up most of their income, most of it, where by the time they pay their rent, they only with the money that they have left, they might be able to buy food. And so, because of the increase in rent, uh, and the increase in the cost of renting an apartment, more and more people are losing their homes and losing their apartments, and it's becoming even more difficult to um, find a place to live. Um, and so the thus is the reasons for the steady rise in homelessness and homeless rates. Okay, and so these statistics, you know, they're I'm presenting them to you so that you can just see how we got here, where we at now, how we got there, um, and you know, so you can kind of see where we're headed. So you can better, you know, brace yourself for, um, you know, the the instance of and the occurrence, the likelihood of you losing your apartment or your dwelling. And it's more prevalent. Homelessness is more prevalent than you'd like to think. And uh, like I said, you know, homelessness can happen to anyone at any time. Okay. Someone experiencing homelessness, um, they could experience it for any number of reasons because of stigma and stereotype. Most people think that, oh well, people who are in the shelters, they're there because they want to be there, or um, everybody that's in the shelter is, a substance abuser or a criminal. That is not true. That is not true. Far from it. In the shelters, um, there are families, whole families in the shelter. In the shelter, there are people who are working, sometimes two and three jobs. And even with two and three jobs, they still are not able to afford housing for themselves. Um, there are people of all walks of life living in the shelter, all walks of life. Um, and they're there for different reasons. And so, you know, those that's those who are in the shelter. And living in the shelter is not easy. Going through the shelter system to get assistance in finding an apartment for yourself, that's not easy at all. There's a lot of forms that you have to fill out, a lot of paperwork, a lot of um, different things that you have to do to meet requirements, eligibility requirements, and it's a lot of steps, a lot of waiting, a lot of uh, rejection. You know, if you are working and you have an income, steady income, but if you are 5 cents over the eligibility, the income eligibility mark, you are no longer eligible for that apartment. If you are uh, working and you have the right income, but um, you your family situation is not, doesn't meet the requirements, you won't be eligible for that apartment, that size apartment. You might be eligible for this size apartment. You know, there's a lot of different um, hindrances that people face once they go through the shelter system just to get an apartment. And so that's why, on average, people are there for 520 days. Um, and that's on average. And they may get an apartment after that. And once they get the apartment, then the struggle is to keep the apartment. Many people wound up you wind up getting an apartment, living in it, maybe with a voucher or so, um, that lasts a year. And then after the year is up, they still haven't been able to secure enough income to remain in the apartment. So then they have to leave the apartment, come all the way back to the shelter all over again. So it's a lot. And it can be overwhelming, so overwhelming that some people um, elect not to go through all the paperwork and the whole bureaucracy of going through the shelter system. Some people become overwhelmed um, at the onset of the process. Some people become overwhelmed in the middle of the process and just decide, you know what, I'm not even going to go to the shelter. I'm not even going to go through all of that. I'm simply going to lay on the street. And that's why you have people that sleep on the street. Um, they, the whole process of going through the shelter system they find it too much, and so they say, well, you know what, let me just take one day at a time, and I'll live on the street until you know I can gather up enough enough mental and emotional stability where I can try to deal with this uh, paperwork and everything by going through the shelter system. Many people simply just, they just live on the street. Now, just because they live on the street um, doesn't make them any less human than anyone else. Just because they live on the street doesn't mean that they're criminal, doesn't mean that even that they have a substance misuse problem. Doesn't mean that. It could, they could very well um, have those situations in their lives, but it doesn't mean that they that's what it is. Okay. Um, some people may be um, dealing with different forms of mental illness. Um, and so it's difficult for them to go through the um, process of filling out paperwork and waiting here and going there and seeing this one and seeing that one just to be told no and all this kind of thing. And so they simply decide, you know what, I'm going to stay on the street, you know, until as long as I can and just survive on the street. And so when you see someone, or if you know someone that um, is uh, unsheltered, living on the street, um, be kind. Remember that they are just as human as you are. You don't know what their story is. So you're not in a position where you can judge them. Okay. Um, Unfortunately, as I stated early on, because uh, back in the uh, 1870s, because some of the southern states had instituted laws, vagrancy laws, that restricted people from unemployed people from uh, you know living living on the street or making makeshift housing uh, on the street. Um, because of those laws uh, criminalized people who were homeless. Okay, and that's where that thinking comes from. But we are far from the 1870s. And the only thing those people were guilty of and got arrested for was being unemployed and unable to secure their own housing. And that's the same thing um, that happens today with people who, for whatever reason, decided that they're going to live on the street. Um, they they're guilty of not being able to afford to secure their own housing, and so they need help. So when you see that person, that man, that woman laying on the street, um, think about that. So all right. So I'm looking to see if there are any questions or comments here. Let me see. Um, all right. Let me see here. Um, I can see myself looking. I'm looking over at on my laptop, and so I wanted to make sure that I am still in camera view at the same time, so that I can see. All right. I don't see any questions. Okay. All right. Okay. So all right. So um now what I want to do is simply give you some uh, places that you can go to if you or someone that you know is experiencing homelessness right now as we speak. Um, and so that you can at least point them in the right direction. Again, um, not everybody um, will elect to go through the shelter system. Um, these are some phone numbers and places that you can direct someone, or that you personally can go yourself to get help with regards to homelessness. Okay. And so I'm just going to read off some of these things. Now, there are emergency shelters that do intake 24 hours a day. Okay. If you are a single adult male, and these are places in New York City. If you're a single adult male, you can go into an emergency shelter that's located at 400 through 430 East 30th Street in Manhattan. So that's 400 through 430 East 30th Street in Manhattan. At that location, that is a single adult male emergency shelter. A single adult female emergency shelter. There are two options there. You can go to the Help Women's Shelter at 116 Williams Avenue. That's 116 Williams Avenue. And then the other, that's Williams Avenue in Brooklyn. Okay, 116 Williams Avenue in Brooklyn. And then the second place is the Franklin Shelter at 1122 Franklin Avenue in the Bronx. That's 1122 Franklin Avenue in the Bronx. That is, those are the locations for two adult single adult female shelters, okay? And then families with children. Um, you would have to go to the um, PATH Center, and the PATH Center is located at 151 East 151st Street. So that's 151 East 151 Street in the Bronx. Okay. That's for um, families with children. You would go there to that location, and they will. That's the family shelter headquarters. You would go there, and they will process you and place you in a family shelter. That's PAC. And then last but not least, there is a shelter for adult families, like couples without children, uh, and or parents and adult children. Okay, these are adult families, no children. Um, you can go to AFIC at 400 through 430 East 30th Street in Manhattan. Okay, that is a shelter location for adult families, couples with no children, or parents and adult children um, can go to that location. Okay, um, and then adults that are experiencing street homelessness. Okay, these are adults that are not in the shelter system, don't have secure housing. You can, if you need services, you can go to a drop-in center. A drop-in center. Um, I have a location here. There are drop-in centers across the 5 boroughs. I have a location here, um, which is I think Lower Manhattan here. It's yeah. This drop-in center is on 32nd Street in Midtown Manhattan. Okay, it's located at 120 East 32nd Street uh, in East Midtown Manhattan. Okay, and then you can get there by taking the number 6 train to 33rd Street and then walk. It says here. And then there's if you need transportation to a shelter, okay, you can call 311 to hear about assistance from the Manhattan Outreach Consortium. Okay, the Manhattan Outreach Consortium. They can arrange for transportation to a shelter. Okay, and I have a phone number for that. Manhattan Outreach Consortium. The telephone number is 212-785-6690. And that number again is 212-785-6690. All right. You want to talk to the um, you want to talk to someone there about arranging for transport to a shelter um, in the uh, in Manhattan for assistance. Okay, and then there's another number. It's called the Breaking Ground Manhattan office at 1-800-871-8910. That's 1-800-871-8910. Um, those are that's uh, that's that's so that you can arrange for transport to a drop-in center, the drop-in center on 32nd Street that I just called out, 120 East 32nd Street. And then I have another um, drop-in center and emergency shelter for youth that are experiencing homelessness. Yes. Um, the largest group filling up the shelters currently are children, youth, teenage youth, and young adults are filling up the shelters right now. And so if you are a youth experiencing homelessness right now, this is the number to a drop-in center. Um, this is the hotline. There is a hotline for youth, particularly experiencing homelessness. Um, this hotline is available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. And the telephone number is 1-800-246-4646 or 646-343-6800. Okay, so I have two numbers for the youth experiencing homelessness hotline. Okay, I'm going to call those numbers out again. Um, the first number is 1-800-246-4646 or 646-343-6800. Okay. You can call those numbers and get to a drop-in center, particularly for youth that are experiencing homelessness. Okay. Um, and then let me see what else I have here. For transportation to that youth drop-in center, you can call the Manhattan Outreach Consortium, the Manhattan office, and the number is the same as I called out before, I believe. No. Okay, well, this is the telephone number. It's 212-785-6690. And then I have another number, 1-800-871-8910. Those two numbers you can call to arrange for transportation to that youth number, to that youth drop-in center. Okay. If you are experiencing or dealing with domestic violence, I have the domestic violence support helpline, including help with emergency shelter. That number is Um, it's a New York City based hotline that operates 24/7, okay, around the clock. And this is the telephone number. The domestic violence hotline is 1-800-621 HOPE. HOP as in Peter, E as in egg. All right. So that telephone number is 1-800-621 HOPE. Okay. You can call that number. Um, that is the domestic violence support helpline. Okay. Um, and then I think I got everything. Homeless prevention services. Okay, I have oh, okay. If you are at risk of becoming homeless, okay, you can call 311 and ask for the homelessness prevention service. Okay. And they will help you uh, also um, get assistance to try to keep you in your apartment. That's the um, home base or homelessness prevention service. You call 311 and ask for them, and you will get assistance in that way. Um, and then that's all that I have with getting shelter. I have a couple of numbers here for, let's see, for food pantry. Um, uh, there's a place that you can go, the Bowery Mission. They serve breakfast at 8 a.m. and lunch at 1 p.m. every day, 7 days a week. Okay. And the address there is 227 Bowery Street in Manhattan. Okay. That's a food pantry there. Um, and then there's another one at Grand Central Neighborhood Social Services Corps. They serve breakfast at from 7 to 8 a.m., lunch from 12 to 1:15 p.m., and um, they serve dinner there from 4 to 6 p.m. every day at 120 East 32nd Street in Manhattan. Okay, those are two shelters. Um, excuse me, two food pantries there. Okay, and then these are places that are in Manhattan. Um, in fact, all of these are places in Manhattan. But if you are in some of the other boroughs, you can call those numbers and just let them know that you're in another borough, um, so that they can connect you with the shelters in some of the other boroughs. But as far as being a family in need of shelter, you have to go to PATH, P as in Peter, ATH, PATH. Um, that is the headquarters um, for all the shelters throughout the 5 boroughs. So you would go there, and that's at 151 uh, 151st Street in the Bronx. And so you would, um, arrange to go there so that they can place you in a shelter in one of the 5 boroughs, a family shelter. Okay. So I'm just going to take one last look. I don't see any questions or comments at this point during the live. Thank you so much for taking your time out to spend with me to learn more about homelessness awareness. Um, my name is Tahis Love, and I'll be here. During the rest of this month, and just bringing you some information about homelessness. On the 21st of this month, I will be on Wake the Nation with Reverend Flo Changajita, and we will be talking about more about homelessness and homelessness awareness. We'll be discussing that. So if you didn't get your questions in on this chat, or you didn't put them in and I addressed them already, you can talk to us there on Wake the Nation, um, uh, that broadcast. And then stay tuned tomorrow. Tomorrow, Sunday, November 14th, I will be uh, discussing, I'll be speaking on the Mind for Christ series. Um, and we'll be speaking on um, homelessness in the Bible. And so, stay tuned for that. And the you know and be sure to like and share this video, share it with anyone that you think will really be able to benefit from it. And thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to sign off now, so have a great evening. And uh, I'm also going to have and anyone that wants to share about their experience with homelessness, or um, if they have any thoughts or experiences that they would like to um, bring to our attention, please feel free to contact me. You can call me at 718 You can um, inbox me on Facebook, Tahis Love, also at on Facebook and Instagram at Dunamis Sound Mind Services. Um, and you can just reach out to me and just talk to me, and let me know what it is that you would like to do, and I will invite you on the show. Um, thank you all so much, and I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you. Have a blessed evening, and good night.